Oxford Group, the largest Brazilian consulting company in the United States for over 40 years, presents Economy and You. Brought to you by LIV Ferreira Araujo Law, with 3 decades of experience in immigration in the United States.
Good evening, dear listeners. Today we are going to talk about more serious topics in terms of strategy, in terms of American national security, and consequently global security. Strategic raw materials have dominated the stage of deliberations, negotiations, and wars in recent times. And for this, we have invited to this program our dear friend Carlos Buqueras, who runs the most Brazilian port in Florida. Carlos Buqueras, thank you very much for your presence and participation in our program.
Thank you very much, Barbieri. It's a pleasure.
Buqueras Port Manatee has extensive experience with Brazil. In particular, the port has a significant share in the entry of Brazilian products in Florida, and there is also a percentage of Brazilian products that represents the port's economic agenda. Give us those numbers, please.
Yes, so we have a variety of Brazilian products. I think that if Brazil stops exporting to the United States, I would have to close the port. We can't do business anymore without Brazil in order to keep going. That's the port's dynamic. The port is strategically located on the Florida Peninsula on the west coast and has access to intermodal rail, a deep water port, a port with deep waters, and logistics for general cargo, containerized cargo, refrigerated cargo, everything a port needs to operate internationally.
Well, they say that the port handles almost 70% of Brazilian products that make up its portfolio, and 43%, if I'm not mistaken, of the value of Brazilian products arrives in Florida, arrives at the port. This creates an extremely Brazilian environment within the port, which of course we are all grateful for. But today we're going to address a slightly more strategic topic. For many years, the United States in particular has neglected certain raw materials. And Asia in general and China in particular have come to practically dominate the extraction of strategic raw materials on which the entire world now depends for cars, watches, and equipment made from these strategic raw materials. And we know that the United States is making a great effort, a Herculean one, in the sense of trying to balance the scales again. And Brazil has the second largest reserve of essential strategic raw materials in the world. Why is the port of Manatee, the region where Manatee is located, considered just like the great expectation that it will be the gateway for the Brazil-United States relationship in this area, which is also about strategic raw materials?
The port is situated in a location with an expansive and vast amount of available land, with numerous undeveloped plots of land situated all around the port area. In my professional opinion, I truly believe that no other port in North America has as much land available to develop, allowing us to be able to develop the entire logistics infrastructure for essential primary goods and raw materials, to be able to process, import, process, re-export, refine, and logistically deliver to the manufacturing site. It is the flexibility of the port that allows this to happen. A port that does not specialize in cruises. We don't have cruises. We have containers, but not many, about 200,000 containers. And the part related to rare earth materials, to raw materials, is already ideally, the port is prepared to handle this effectively and properly. The import and distribution of the material. In general, we have the capacity, for example, to import almost all the rare earth that Brazil can export. To give an example, a maximum example, we are fully capable of handling all the shipping containers and all the various types of general cargo produced by all the mines across Brazil within a single calendar year.
In this case, for example, the port has the advantage of being able to extend its free trade zone up to 60 miles from the port. And this covers 7 counties, if I'm not mistaken, still with land available, as you mentioned, at attractive prices, at fair prices. Do you believe that this could lead to part of the mining or industrial work related to the processing of this raw material being done in this region as a whole?
Yes, the great advantage of having a free trade zone, an FTZ, which can be applied to any building purchased by a Brazilian company, to any building that is rented, is a huge advantage. Having this flexibility to establish an FTZ where the client wants, not where the port wants, but where the client wants to set it up within this 60-mile radius. This doesn't happen at other ports. And therefore, the widespread availability of land, having sufficient land to be able to expand operations, the free trade zone in the FTZ, and all the other essential factors, the local port, which is remarkably deep, providing efficient loading and unloading, all of this significantly contributes to long-term predictability. That Brazilian mining companies will be able to export here with the full assurance that they will have exactly what they need.
The location of the port here on Florida's west coast, logically, this depends a lot on logistics because it will arrive. The product will have to be partially processed and then shipped to other areas of the United States. How is the rail system from the port? Does it reach some American states or all states in terms of logistics, whether by highway or railway? What is the position of the port? The
port, fortunately, has everything. This facility features a railway system and also a waterway network, so we can transport raw materials to other states by boat using barge distribution. Like Aquavia in Brazil with barges and also by truck and by railroad. The railroad here at the port reaches all of the United States. It's inside the port, not outside. It's actually within the port and controlled by the port. The highways, the land transport are also very efficient. From the port here, we can access the system of US highways, the interstate highways, and we can get from here to Chicago, from here to New York in about 2 or 3 days at most. So we have all of that, right? So there is absolutely no essential element or logistical requirement missing from the options that a comprehensive importation of high-quality minerals from Brazil would need. In fact, every single required resource and documentation is currently fully accessible and ready for use. This gives great assurance to the exporter who won't run into something they need to do but can't and didn't know the port couldn't handle.
And internally, the port's infrastructure can handle, let's say, an extraordinary flow of products that might arrive in containers or bookings from Brazil. Does the port still have the availability and capacity for that?
Absolutely, yes. That's why I said earlier that theoretically, all of Brazil's exports of raw materials, of rare earths, let's say we're talking about 100,000 containers, maybe 200,000, could be handled here without having to leave the port, without needing to use another port, because we can handle all of that at maximum capacity right here in Brazil today.
In other words, the port, just the maritime one, would be able to meet all of Brazil's export needs and, of course, American imports as well, of strategic raw materials.
Exactly. I looked at the numbers, I looked at the volume, more or less, of the maximum exports that different projects could have, as he knows. And in fact, the volume can be handled within the port without having to use another port or having to expand the railway or having to expand the highways.
And in the case of the region, is there a strategic political vision from these counties, particularly Manatee, but also the others around it, to turn this part of Florida into a major strategic hub for the country?
Yes, fortunately not. We have a lot of land here, which is something very unique in Florida. The further north you go from Miami, the more land there is, right? But you also can't do it too far outside the system. And Manatee is right here in the center of Florida, closer to Orlando than to Miami. And it's also central to where the population is, where the people are, the workers who can do this job are right here. At the same time, no one could be upset that the port causes a lot of pollution, that it's not pretty or whatever it may be. The port here is very protected from all of that. Environmental restrictions, noise restrictions, manufacturing restrictions. So ideally, the port is in a unique position to be able to, let's say, import raw materials, whether it's rare earth or other raw materials from Brazil.
Yes, because here we have a range of products that is 10 or 12 essential products, lithium, graphene, of course, rare earths, and even more precious metals like gold, etc. Do you think, Buqueras, that it will be possible to find labor, including technical labor, in this region? Or would the region be ready and prepared to expand training programs so that we have enough skilled workers, technicians, and scientists to do this work here in the region?
Absolutely. I'll explain why. A few years ago, a major international company, a specialized manufacturer of gasification and LNG, which stands for liquefied natural gas, found that they urgently needed, I believe the number was 2,000, no, sorry, it was actually 2,300 highly skilled welders and technicians to complete their projects. The educational infrastructure in this region features a robust technical school system. Consequently, if an importer or a company needs highly specialized personnel, the system will provide all the necessary training for these people, entirely free of charge, with the help of the importer or the manufacturer. Because we may have a lot of land, as I mentioned before, but if we don't have the people to do this with the necessary technology and to learn it, it would be useless. And this has been proven. We can teach how, when, and in what way, collaborating with the importer or the company that needs to manufacture and adapt a 6-month, 3-month, or 1-year course, preparing before the company's arrival, so that this personnel is available to be able to manufacture.
Academically speaking, what do we have around the port of Manatee? Are there universities? Are there higher education institutions, let's say reputable ones?
Yes, absolutely. We have a university system from Florida here, USF, University of South Florida. We have technology schools. And we are in a region, actually Barbieri, which is really the metropolitan region of Manatee, Tampa, Orlando. There are more people living here and more people available here than there are in Miami, for example. And the schools are top-notch with very high technical standards and very high performance. So there is great diversity. And what these schools can't do or haven't done yet, a system can be developed, an education system to prepare technicians so that, let's say, manufacturing can be done here without having to go elsewhere to find personnel.
And in terms of air travel, the Manatee Airport is close to, if I remember correctly, Tampa. Sarasota also has an international airport, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So both national and international. In fact, we have Orlando, Tampa, Sarasota, and for domestic flights within the United States, we have direct flights to all over the United States directly from here, from the region. Tampa, Sarasota, Manatee, Orlando.
The people from Manatee have regularly participated in intermodal in Brazil. Usually Manatee leads the participation. And has this been a good experience for Manatee in terms of logistics, the relationship with the other intermodal companies that are present at these events, usually in Sao Paulo?
Absolutely. I just came back from a similar intermodal event in Sao Paulo, one from Europe, because we have connections to maintain, right? To educate to a very high level of knowledge in what we call global supply chain solutions, international global logistics solutions. Because ports can't just be, let's say, port authorities that simply rent out whatever the companies want. No. We have to help these companies find solutions to their logistics problems. Otherwise, we are of no use at all.
Yes, in this case, for example, the Port of Manatee, how does the labor part work? Is it all under unions or is it open? Does Manatee have the freedom at its port for shipping companies to come here and hire labor at a fair rate?
Absolutely. Otherwise, they wouldn't come. So we have staff. The shipping company can hire union or non-union personnel. Florida is a state that, let's say, allows free hiring of personnel. If you want to hire union workers, you can. And if you prefer not to, you can also hire private personnel. It's a perfect model because in cases where there is some flexibility to do this, one option might be cheaper, the other might be more expensive. But what happens is that you have the specialization of being able to choose whichever staff you want.
And with that, logically, the price ends up being, with competition, the price ends up being lower. That is more competitive.
It is certainly more competitive. That is true.
Today, what is the volume that the port operates in terms of value? More information about the port. I think it would be really interesting for our listeners to learn more about the port, please.
If the port isn't, we are a port authority. And here in Florida, there are about 14 port authorities that cover the entire coast of E. We are like an airport. We are contracting with shipping companies so that they come here. We are also contracting with manufacturers from Brazil, for example, in cellulose, a lot of cellulose imports from El Dorado, from Klabin, from Suzano, and also products from Argentina like aluminum. Millions, 450 million. But we also import fresh fruit, for example, bananas, logistically 1.4 billion bananas per year, 48. More than 1 million fresh ripe pineapples. And about 48 million avocados. Yes, avocados. So the port handles fruit. Fresh, refrigerated, bulk material, dry goods in volume, containers, everything except cruise ships. So it is a monumental challenge with the large number of staff required to make this happen, resulting in a significant economic impact of more than $5 billion on the entire country.
Wow. And in terms of, if you can talk about it economically, is the Port of Manatee self-sufficient or does it require state support to operate?
Not a single dollar, no. Not a single dollar from the state to operate. Today we are a business. We are like a private company that can't depend on the government to, if I do a bad job, if I invest in something bad, they're not going to bail me out. No. Simply put, if we can't pay the port's bills, we have to shut down. And that would happen if the Brazilian exporters leave. Then yes, the port would close because we have so many like Citrusuco, which comes here every week. There are also other companies, as I already mentioned, like El Dorado, etc., Suzano, Madeira do Brasil. I think almost everything that is exported to Brazil worldwide leaves from right here.
I remember more than a decade ago, you were still at Everglades and were invited to take on the challenge at Manatee. At the time, if I'm not mistaken, Manatee was almost about to close due to losses. The port's economic situation has turned around, I imagine.
Yes, that's true. Before, for example, when I arrived here, the port had serious financial problems. It was almost shut down due to problems with not having enough capital. Now, the local county of Manatee, where we are right now, almost had to intervene in the situation and had to provide a financial bailout for the entire port. 14 years later, the entire county actually has less money than we do. And we're thinking about making some short-term loans to the county. And the county does. The county's budget is $1.2 billion. We have more capital in the port than the county does, even with 1.2 billion per year. So we changed that. Why? Because Brazilian exporters need a port that is stable, a port that is predictable. You can't pay X today and 4X tomorrow. That can't happen.
No, that's actually perfect.
The predictability, flexibility, and deep sense of trust that the port must provide to exporters across Brazil is essential. And we've always focused on that.
Well, I'm going to ask you for 15 seconds for our commercial break, and we'll be right back.
For over 20 years, the ILIF, Pereira de Araujo law firm has been providing quality, customized services for professionals, entrepreneurs, and investors coming to the United States. It also excellently represents companies employing foreigners on a temporary or permanent basis. We understand that each client's case is unique and requires a specific approach. We maintain clear and objective communication with the client. Contact us to find out more. Lifelaw.com.
Good evening. We're back with our dear friend Carlos Buqueras talking about the Port of Manatee, an exception among ports worldwide due to its excellent management. Buqueras, in operational terms, the Brazilian port system has a national port authority. Each port depends on or reports to Brasilia. And because of that, of course, we have things, both positive and negative things. How does the American port system work? Does each port have its own independence, or does it depend on a single authority?
The ports depend on the port authority, on the board of directors, but this board does not depend on another state or on a national port federation. There is no national port federation nor a ministry of ports in the United States. Each port can do what it needs to do in order to meet the needs of its clients. It's very fast. We don't need to. If a client tells me today, I need this, I don't have to go to Washington to ask and wait a year to get something the client needs. Today, a big advantage of not having a centralized system, right? And that means that decisions are much faster, which is what the private sector needs.
Yes, wonderful. And the Port of Manatee, who is the port authority?
Who is it? The
Port authority, who is in charge of the port? It's
the board of directors. In all, there are a total of 7 distinct members, and they are responsible for reviewing and approving all of the port's various investments. It is a professional job, and it is a formal board that provides essential oversight, so I do not end up going crazy. And then perhaps start selling off the entire port, or start buying up expensive buildings in Brasilia, or even start making very bad financial investments. They function exactly like a professional board of directors, a governing board that sets the overall strategic direction, and my specific job is to be able to successfully get there profitably with gains and not with losses. We are like a private company. If a company wants to come and can't pay what is needed based on what I have to provide for them, then we won't be able to do business with them.
In other words, the administration of the port is operationally independent. The directives come from this board. The decision belongs to the port's board of directors.
Exactly.
And in slightly broader terms, the port naturally has its own dynamics, it has its own clients, and it can contract with clients within its operational independence.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly. Yes, for example, a Brazilian exporter needs like AIP. They need to have a special berth for them. We do that. If they need a warehouse to store cargo, we do that directly with the exporter or the importer.
Perfect. And we have comparisons here. We see it like this. Is the Port of Manatee much smaller than the Port of Miami? Is it bigger? Is it the same size? Of course, for us Brazilians, the Port of Miami has its own significance. Exactly. Manatee compared to Miami without merit or demerit, just in numerical terms.
Yes, in terms of land of space at the Port of Manatee, we have 3 times more land than at the Port of Miami. The Port of Miami, more or less in acres, which is 2.4 acres per hectare, has about 460 acres. And we have 1,400 acres. About half of that, more or less half, is still to be developed for expansion. And we know that the Port of Miami, because it has been very successful at doing things very well, doesn't have a single square meter left for expansion.
You were the director of Port Everglades, right?
Yes.
When we look at this from a comparative perspective, what exactly were the items that you brought back with you from value to Manatee compared to Everglades?
The value, I think those ports are very developed. The good thing about ports is that as Florida's population keeps growing, Miami, Everglades, and other ports can no longer handle more cargo. They're at their limit. It's good for the city of Florida to have a release valve for expansion, so we can keep importing, so we can deliver what consumers keep demanding. Whether it's high quality lumber for construction, essential raw materials for building roads, or orange juice for drinking. The port located here actually isn't a typical port where once leaving the facility, the goods are processed much further. Unless we are discussing rare earth minerals, what we import goes directly to the consumer. So it's a very direct, very positive line. But in order to expand, because if the ports can't expand, then they can't do more. And what consumers in Florida need will have to come from somewhere else in the United States.
Florida is an interesting point for all of Latin America in general and for the United States as well, because it's both a point of entry and a point of exit. Florida, in terms of Brazil. It is the state that has the strongest relationship with the United States and Brazil. Here it is Florida's main trading partner. And Brazil continues to grow. Today, Brazil is certainly the second largest population immigrating to Florida, not only in terms of people, but also in terms of capital. In this area of the West Coast, Florida is growing, it's not shrinking, and it tends to grow even more. You who are here on the West Coast, here in Manatee, how do you see the growth of this region?
Well, based on all the people who are moving here, for Florida, the West Coast offered the only location, the only part of Florida that could still grow. And until a few years ago, it had the highest growth rate in the United States. Because everyone liked the pandemic as well. We wanted to move to Florida, right? And during the pandemic, a lot of people moved to Florida as well. So the West Coast area, I think, has had the biggest growth in the United States recently.
I can't take it. There's a big responsibility, if I'm not mistaken. Practically all the fuel for the West Coast is supplied by the trucks that leave from Manatee, right?
Exactly. We have shipments of fuel imports that go directly to a dedicated fuel terminal, including gasoline here at the port, gasoline, diesel, and other fuels. And it is all carefully transported and distributed daily, 24 hours a day, to all the numerous gas stations located throughout Florida's West Coast. This ensures a steady supply for everyone in the region.
Wow, that's fantastic. A question out of curiosity. Manatee had a history of not having suffered from previous hurricanes. This last one that passed through here, something called Milton, caused some substantial damage, and people were really impressed by how quickly Manatee was back up and running. Why was Manatee's recovery so fast?
The thing is, the reconstruction system, the emergency system, is very well developed here. As you said, Barbieri, I think that when the hurricane passed, within an hour or two after it was gone, everything was already being repaired. Everything. The Coast Guard opened the port, right? They inspected the port's routes, right? They checked the port channel to make sure there wasn't a stranded boat, right? They opened the port directly, and we immediately started delivering again, right? To get gasoline out of the port, which is the most important part, right? Without that, you can't go buy anything, you can't do anything. So fuel, food, right? And everything you need to have a normal life, immediately in less than 18 hours, it was already operating. And now, if you go back to the port after almost 2 years, you'll see that the port is just like it was before. We were able to repair everything in about 6 months, thanks to Florida's experience in being able to recover and restore the system in a matter of weeks and not
months. That's really fantastic. And the prestige that the port has with the state government. We can read in the press about the governor's presence at the port more than once, which shows the affection, respect, and of course the state's gratitude for the port's service. Now, with the potential the reopening of Cuba, the port will apparently have a privileged position. Is that due to proximity, to relationships? To what do you attribute this general expectation of closer ties with the port due to the reopening of Cuba?
Well, the opening of Cuba could be a very good opportunity, not only for the United States, but also for Brazil. Why is that? Because if Cuba opens up, it's not just that they will need everything that Brazil produces. Now, there is a problem with being able to export directly from Brazil to Cuba. What is the problem? The problem is that the volume that needs to be delivered from Brazil to Cuba is very large compared to what can actually be consumed. And the idea would be to be able to bring it here, as we already do with some things, to bring it here and then send it to Cuba gradually over time. In the number of daily consumptions, it's like a pantry. It's like the supermarket for Cuba. And this approach could greatly benefit Brazilian exporters.
Fantastic. Let's get back to the main topic of our conversation today. So in terms of strategic raw materials, you as the person in charge of the port, can you confirm for us that the port should be, let's say, the gateway for this Brazilian wealth to meet the American strategic need?
Yes, absolutely. That's not just something I say myself. This can be proven. We can demonstrate that this is correctly based on the interests of a Brazilian exporter. This is something you have to believe me on. You don't just have to contact you or me, and we can explain based on the material how, when, and in what way to be able to confirm with this Brazilian exporter that what we are saying we want to do is not just talk, but actually for this Brazilian exporter. You can do it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time, for your dedication, always being available to the press here, and especially to Fox Brazil, seeking to inform Brazilian entrepreneurs about international trade and the economy. What is your final word for our listeners?
As they say here, come here, we leave the door open, and you can start producing, selling, and developing Brazilian products immediately without any delay. Welcome to Florida.
Thank you very much, Buqueras. Thank you very much. Always extremely kind. We will surely see each other in August at the Orlando event, where you will give a very interesting talk about the importance of the port and the free zone for all of us.
I would like to thank you very much.
Dear listeners, we have just heard from our dear Carlos Buqueras, leader of the Florida port system, practically one of the most well-known people in Brazil for the seriousness with which he manages the logistics of the ports here, particularly now and for some years in Manatee. We are certain that the information he gave us is extremely motivating, so that we know that the port of Manatee should be the gateway for the expansion of Brazilian exports in the mineral sector, which is surely the essence of our country's future, because it is a wealth that is still unexplored, so rich and of such extraordinary value. Good evening to you all. Stay with us. Surely next week we will have another great program for all of us. Good night.